We're all pretty familiar with the words carbon footprint. Say it with me. A carbon footprint is a measure of the total amount of carbon dioxide, CO2, and methane, CH4, emissions of a defined population, system, or activity, considering all relevant sources, sinks, and storage within the spatial and temporal boundary of the population, system, or activity of interest. Calculated as carbon dioxide equivalent using the relevant 100-year global warming potential, GWP 100. Hey, good job. See, I knew you knew it. Okay, so even without the exact definition, most of us have easily assimilated the general idea that the things we consume produce carbon emissions, and that carbon emissions are bad because, well... That idea, that emissions are mostly a product of what we produce and consume, is the basic idea behind any kind of carbon footprint at the end of the day, and it's pretty much common sense. But there's a lot more to this measure than meets the eye. And hidden beneath what could have been a positive idea are very nefarious intentions and some pretty damaging consequences when it comes to climate change. Because even though finding ways to reduce your personal impact on greenhouse gas emissions can be a good thing, that's not what the term carbon footprint is there to do. To understand what's going on, we should talk a bit more about the origin of this phrase. Footprint comes from the more general ecological footprint, a term coined in the 90s by these guys in this report, which eventually became this book. In this book, the two academics start off with a truly horrific, stomach-churning analogy about a wasp that gives birth in a mushroom, and then casually follow it up with around 150 pages of standard environmental economics, using the idea of an ecological footprint to talk about how production and consumption are dependent on various uses of resources, namely fossil fuels. Thrilling stuff. The thing is that, on its own, this book is fine. Not without room for criticism, plenty of that to go around, but mostly pretty uncontroversial stuff about how the environment is important, humans are important, and we can't keep extracting and polluting this much and also expect economic growth forever and ever until the end of time. There are even some neat little sentences about how free enterprise and free trade are not only some of the root causes of the environmental crisis we're in today, but relying on them or the imaginary eco-modernist capitalist tech utopia as a solution won't actually help us. Pause the video if you want to read the original text, nerds. The rest of us will be moving on. So if this book is mostly uncontroversial, and its use of the phrase ecological footprint is fine, why make a 15-minute video about carbon footprints? Well, because the only reason we even know what a carbon footprint is thanks to a massive appropriation of the term by BP, British Petroleum, and their 2005 advertising campaign. You might know BP from their shocking lack of a fun facts section on Wikipedia. Or maybe you know them from this ad, in which they took the bright-eyed ecological footprint stepping off the bus in the big city and turned it into the red carpet attending, gala hosting, movie star carbon footprint we all know and love. Take a look.
How much carbon I produce. Is that it?
You mean the effect that my living has on the earth in terms of the products I consume?
Around the same time this ad ran, BP also launched its very own carbon footprint calculator online, getting over 1 million website visitors and around 300,000 people to do the survey, back when those weren't tiny little internet numbers. These two projects cemented the term in popular culture and made it what it is today. At first glance, and to much of the consumer market, this was a revolutionary ad campaign and a shocking stance from one of the world's largest producers of fossil fuels. You have to understand that this was not how the oil business was done. When, in the 1970s, Exxon conducted private research on greenhouse gas emissions and found mountains of evidence of their central impact on global warming, they didn't tell anybody. It took another decade or so before public researchers caught on, and even once it was all out in the public, Exxon and all their buddies spent hefty sums on misinformation, disinformation, lobbying, and round-the-clock advertising questioning the reality of climate change, which they had known for years was a fact of greenhouse gas emissions, in order to stall policies that would try to rein them in. Fossil fuel executives took all the lessons they learned from your college boyfriend and gaslit the hell out of the American public. When this campaign first started, you could look around and see bold ad slogans promoted by the fossil fuel sector like, "How much are you willing to pay to solve a problem that may not exist?" Or the knee-slapping, "Who told you the Earth was warming? Chicken Little?" You can imagine that in that kind of context, an ad that explicitly states the reality of climate change coming from one of the industries it is most closely associated with was unheard of. But you're not dumb. You already know why they did it. There was no legitimate concern about the global environment, not from one of the companies that stands to profit off of it the most. It was all about shifting the blame from them to you.